My name is Akosh. I'm the CEO of Airtime, the user engagement platform, empowering product teams to validate user needs within a couple of days. Today, I'll be talking to Daniel about improving product usage by eliminating friction, user friction specifically, how to identify friction points, how to decide which ones to focus on, and most importantly, how to find the right solution for them. Daniel, it's a pleasure to have and an honor to have you here. First thing, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. Nice to be here. I'm Daniel, product design strategy specialist, startup advisor, and founder of Duran, which is like a small startup, product design studio, mostly working with ambitious startup founders, helping them to create, build intuitive digital products and have them to scale. That's what I do for quite some time now.
Can you share some of the companies that you've been working with?
There are a bunch of Romanian companies. I'm based in Romania, so I don't know how relative they are. I work with some around, usually I work with startups around seed to Series A. And that's what I worked with as well here. I was also mentoring in like what people might know in Techstars Paris and Startup Wise guys for some startups, part of Startup Lisboa from some connections around there. So yeah, helping startups around Europe, I would say, mostly on product and UX related questions.
Fantastic. Thank you. Then let's jump in. And one of the first topics I'd like to discuss is that, and I'm going to start with a study from Pendo. Some of you may know Pendo. It's a product analytics tool, and it has a feature adoption report. I think it's back from 2019. And while it's also partially a sales material for them, what they looked at is to what extent the end users are using features of the customers of Pendo. And what they realized from data is 25% of feature are never used, and about 50% is used less than a month. And this happens in a world where agile is standard. Everyone knows we should be talking to customers and getting customer feedback. So I just wanted to get your view on how do you think this could happen, that there are like so many features built out there that users practically don't use?
Well, I don't have like a straight. There are actually a couple of things that might happen. It was one of the things that I was actually thinking about when you sent over the question. There is not a single answer for it. At least I don't have a single answer for it, but there are a couple of things that I would look out for. So there is one thing that you already mentioned, talking with customers. And though we say, like, I know a bunch of companies that either work with or worked in it, that we said that we are agile, we do Scrum, we whatever. But actually we weren't doing something like that. It's a straight waterfall thing, shipping products, features, whatever. So there is that aspect of like not being actually in touch with the customer that you say that you're in touch with. There is also sometimes misleading stuff. Like I remember back in the days when I was part of a company, and we thought that a bunch of customers were asking for a feature or improving a feature, but it was a couple of, actually just a few of them, but very loud customers. So they sent over the same thing a bunch of times. And we thought, oh, look, everybody's asking for this thing, but it was actually not like that. So there is that part. You are either not in contact with the customers, either in a way misled and think that you are, but you're looking for something else or in some different directions. There is that part. But there is also when in a way the feature request is pushed downwards from top, like the HIPAA and everybody that you like managers in the company. So they in a way have a pet project and they want to get that done. That also happened for me a couple of times. But there are also other aspects that I think are important, and we should, in a way, it affects the study or these kind of studies, but it's just one face of the coin. Like when you develop something that's more like a marketing stunt, that the product will actually will be used. And I think in a way that's relevant now with AI. Like everybody does AI stuff, but it's not necessarily the core thing of the product. It's not necessarily will be used by the product or the people that are using the product, but it's much more like it. It's nice to have it out there. It's like, oh, we do this, and then we throw it out. If you just check the usage,
so it's like for grabbing the attention of the of users. I
Yeah.
was once told, I was talking about smart TVs with someone, and someone told me like smart TVs have like 200 features,
Mm.
most of which like nobody uses. But the knowledge that all these features are there, it's an important factor when you make a decision to purchase
Yeah.
that product.
When you compare it to something else, it looks like, look, this has this feature. You sometimes don't even understand the features, especially on a smart TV. You have like a bunch of stuff that you don't know what they do. It's like, oh, they have this high vision, whatever, versus the other one that, oh, that doesn't have something like that. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's like matching expectations or in a way, matching the baseline. So you have to be, because the competitor has something like this, our customers expect something like this, we will do it, but it might not be the core part of our product. So there is also that part. And in some cases, just test out new stuff. So it's like you try out different stuff, see what's working. Hopefully you launch it soon and know that you have to cut it out. But sometimes you know how it happens. It stays in there in the product because a couple of people might use it. And if you cut it out, that you don't want to upset those customers. So sometimes get lost in. So I wouldn't like, as in a way bad the reports look. I think there are a couple of phases that you have to look through. There is definitely in some cases that aspect that you mentioned, that you are not in contact with your customers, so you just develop stuff, or it is just features that, pet projects and stuff like that. But in other places, I think you have to look on the other parts of this whole thing. It might be a marketing stunt to grab attention, or it might be a test, and hopefully if it doesn't work out, it will be cut out.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This was a very nuanced view, and I appreciate you for like investigating this topic from multiple angles. Um, Coming to the main focus of today, like digging a level deeper. How do you define user friction? And so first question, let's start with that. So how do you define it? If you have a product, you built a number of features in there. When do you know that there's friction in there for users?
Well, sometimes you know it from the users because they give feedback on that, or at least you try to get feedback on that. And there are a bunch of tools for something like that. By tracking different metrics, hopefully, if you define them, you know what to track. And there are, again, a bunch of tools like Hotjar, Google Analytics, Mixpanel, and a bunch of other ones to track something like this. And you can pull this whole data in a customer journey map or something similar. Basically, what I usually do with the people that I work with is like we create a map and we try to put all the information on the map so we have an overview. Because otherwise, it's like I have this opinion, you have that opinion, and it might be slightly different, but that slight difference might actually have a huge impact down the road on the strategy and on what we will do. So I try to create like a general overview of how the things are at this moment, what we know, what we don't know, and we need more data. That's also important. But just talking with customers, doing either usability tests, either interviews, either just seeing how people are using the product through and different analytics tools, or actually being on calls with them and just see how they use the tools. That's, I guess, it's like a tremendous value on these kind of stuff, helping you have an overview of what things are working, what things are not working.
Okay, so you're saying that there's like a mixture of
Yes.
analytics as well as qualitative approaches like interviews or moderated tests, where you can spot if a user has like a difficulty accomplishing a certain goal or task in the application. I was wondering if we could bring it down from this theoretical level to a practical one, and if there's like a story or a project that you can share us with that explains in practice how this mapping out of the user journey and finding a couple of friction points happens.
Yeah, I can tell you how I usually do this on projects that I work with. So as I mentioned, I do a lot of journey maps. Either it's a customer journey map, either it's a user story mapping or something like that. But the easiest way is to do like customer journey map. You have the customer profile, you try to find customers that match in a way that profile, and you try to map the flow. I do this a lot with founders because I work mostly with, as I mentioned, kind of early stage, and they might not have the data. So they still might not have enough data at least to be, I don't know, relevant. So if in case they have Hotjar or something that can give us some insights in actually seeing how people we use that, we try to go through a couple of videos, see how people are using the product, where are the friction points, and put them on the customer journey map, or doing like a UX audit or something like that. But the customer journey is the easiest way to think about this whole thing. And the other part is, the other part is to map the insights from the people that are in contact with customers. So in one of the projects, we grabbed the support team, somebody that represented the support team, the sales team representatives, the founders. These are all people that were straight in contact with the customers, or talking with the customers. And we mapped all their feedback on the customer journey map. And then based on their hypothesis and some of the stuff that they were thinking that are true, we actually ended up talking with their customers and invalidated some of that stuff. But this whole thing, it was in a way feeded back into the customer journey.
So this is a project that you did because you work with companies. Let's assume I'm a PM in a tech startup, seed stage, early stage. So it means I need to have my finger on the pulse of the customer on a regular basis. Is there a way of like continuously like getting these beeps and signals about user frictions, and not approach it from a project as a project, which tends to be more like a single effort, and then a break, and then another project?
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, a lot of founders and PMs in early stage, they are thinking about discovery or interviews like a one thing off. So you do it at the beginning of whatever, the product, the feature, and kind of that's it. What happened in one of the startups that I work with at this moment is that they ended up setting a continuous user interview track, if you want. So that's what you want to have in the end. Definitely you will have spikes if you invest more in those interviews, or you invest more resources in interviews or gathering data at some points, but you try to have a continuous flow of being in contact with your customers in a way or the other. So what we've done, it was like either it was straight interviews, like just to be done interviews to understand what the customers were looking into the product and how they were using the product, either testing different prototypes with them, like on live Zoom calls or other kind of calls, either just sending out links and like asking them, look, we want to do this new feature. Where would you click on starting this thing? Just to understand how they think about where that feature should be positioned. Or we sent out different smaller interview questions regarding positioning different elements or splitting the whole flow in different parts. But this was, in a way, it has at least two different sides. So it was either straight on like direct calls with the customer. That means like setting up the calls and the whole calendar invite and getting them on the call and giving them something to get on the call, like gift cards and stuff. But it was the other part as well, where it was more about sending a direct question to them and just trying to find answer. Now, definitely the amount of people that gets into the calls is less than the other one, but you can have more insights from that part than from just a simple question. And besides this, like you can use the metric, like anything that can track different metrics, as I mentioned, but for that you have to set it up. You have to define the metrics that you want to track, and that's, I would say, a different story.
Yeah. And for these for these interviews, I guess there's like an automations, you can like email automations you can set up to recruit from your CRM system.
Yeah, we used a bunch of tools. So there was one tool, I forgot the name of that, just to add a modal in the app. So we said that, okay, we want this model to show for specific customers at a specific point in the app. That led to a Calendly link that they can book the call on the calendar directly through the Calendly link. And then you can set the Calendly link to send out reminders at specific times, so they actually make the call, something like this. Oh, and there was basically the emails that you mentioned as well in between.
Okay, got it. So let's go back to the user journey. One of the ways I think about friction points is that the user journey is like a progression of you get to, like, from a prospect, let's just say you become a customer at one point. And then one of the first ways I would identify friction is that where are the major drop-offs in this process? Is my thinking, limited or flawed in any way? Are there other ways of thinking about friction and finding friction in the user journey map?
I would say start with the easiest. Like instead of like focusing on something that like the best way to do this, it's like start with the thing that you know you can handle at this point. You know, like I found this thing like when I was talking with some founders, it was like, look, we are looking for how whatever company does something like this, and at one point it makes sense, but in the beginning it's sometimes much about like get things out, test it, collect feedback, iterate, put something out, test it again. So you don't even with stuff like tracking metrics, you might not have enough customers yet, but it's good to start with something. So just put that Google Analytics code in there and start tracking stuff. And after that, you figure out what you don't know, and we will try to figure out at that point. So in my opinion, the customer journey map or something similar to that, it's like a good starting point. Definitely there are stuff to improve on it, and you will revisit the customer journey map a couple of times and maybe throw it out and create a new one, because these are not one time off things. So it's like if you create a user persona, if you create a customer journey map, if you create, I don't know, if you run interviews, they're not like you've done it once, so you have everything and you don't do it anytime soon. Like most of the times there are, as I mentioned, different spikes when you do these, but you still try to get a decent amount of input from that to make sure that you are in line with the strategy. Hopefully that does in a way answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I would still like go back to let's assume a case where you do have more analytics data and a product that is regularly used, and there's an abundance of friction point. It sounds bad, but there are more, and the resources are limited. There's only so much of the tech team's time that is dedicated to bugs or fixes. So what is your mental model for picking and prioritizing the most important friction points?
Oh, that's a tough question. Because like it's not a one simple answer for something like this, obviously. And this is why some of the answers might look like a bit clumsy, because it's like, in my opinion, there is not a silver bullet to this kind of stuff. So it like really have to be, everything should be aligned in a way to your business and product strategy. And obviously that prioritization is like, that's highly aligned with your product and the product strategy and business strategy. So what sometimes we ended up doing is like picking those in a way low hanging fruits that like you can launch out some stuff really fast and actually have a big impact on the product. So if you find something like this, definitely that should be prioritized first. But after that, there are a couple of other stuff that you will look out for, like how much time you should invest, what are the resources, what are the risks, and what you can throw out first. Like throw out means put out actually to the customers to use, not like throw it. And even then, the first thing is not like, it's not you full-fledged and go and develop. It's you, if it's something bigger, you usually try to run a prototype or test somehow with the customers and get back to your customers. So this is why it's like, in a way, not easy to give a straight answer to something like this, because it really depends on a lot of stuff. You, as a PM, basically you have a bunch of inputs from different areas, and it's your role to make sense of those. And those are related to the strategy of the company, to the product, to your customer needs, to your vision of this whole development process, and also in line with what you have in-house as like development team and designers and the other parts. And you have to get this whole thing in a way in one place and make sense of it. Now there are definitely different ways to do this. There is a RISE model or the ICE model, and like different people are using different stuff and they have very strong opinions why they use one or the other. But in the end, it goes back to where do you want to go? Like, what's the whole vision, mission of this thing? What's your strategy to get there, and how all these things fit in? Because that will guide your, in a way, your way of thinking about prioritization. Again, with the low-hanging fruits, as I mentioned, that might be a good thing to start.
Yes, I think it was very helpful for you to also mention these different factors that you look at, like the impact on user experiences, the resources that you have. the time or the budget that you require to implement.
Everything is tied back
some.
in a way to that. So it's like, this is why it's really hard. Even if I say like you should use the ICE model or the RICE model, it's like in the end it's tied back to what you have in-house or what resources you have, and that will feed back to whatever model you use.
Okay. I get that. Just give me one thing. 1 second. Yeah, well, one of the guests, Harry, is trying to dial in.
Okay.
Harry, no offense, I'm not going to put you on stage, but I saved your question, and we're going to get back to that as soon as our discussion is through with Daniel. Now, what else? What else did I want to ask? Skills. I am, because you described here a lot of things, like just in the last 3 minutes, all these different factors and forces in the company that a PM has to manage. It's overwhelming. Yeah. But if we focus on the ideal skill set you need as a PM to find friction points and eliminate them, what do you think? Like, what should be like the top 3 skills that people should have? And just I'd like to put it out there, and also me think about it, and everyone think about it, where we rank or where we score with these skills, and what is it that we need to improve on.
Yeah, I have one that it's like, it doesn't want to sound like fancy, but one of the biggest, in a way, when you work in a startup, especially when you work in a startup, one of the biggest skills, if you want, that you should have is low ego, because like that will, like, if you have a high ego, it will be like crushed in like minutes. Customers will have different opinions. Your colleagues will have different opinions. You don't have resources to do all the stuff, so you have to prioritize and cut out different stuff. So I would say getting in line with that and being okay that your hypothesis, your assumptions will be crushed a bunch of times. That's one of the biggest things that you should do. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I assume it was Leah or one of the big PMs that they have podcasts and stuff. And she said like she started to track the accuracy of her assumptions or something like that. And it was 70 or 80% of her assumptions were wrong. So come on, it's somebody that's highly skilled, she knows her stuff, and still it's like, if you take it like that, it's like 80% you're wrong and you have 20% that's okay. And from that 20%, probably like 5 or 10% that are like high value stuff. And if you read any kind of startup book and any kind of product book, and that's in a way what still amazes me, if you read any kind of these books, what they say is that basically the difference between a good product team and a bad product team is how many assumptions they can test, like basically the speed of testing assumptions and throwing out what's not working. And there are still a lot of product teams that are like just building features, like feature factories, and building, not testing anything. And it takes months to actually build the feature, put it out there, to figure out that it's not working when you have other ways to do it. So that's a very long way to say low ego is definitely one of the biggest skills, I would say, that you should develop.
Before you move on to anything, I have a sub question here. Do you think that testing your assumptions, it by definition will make you humble and less ego because you're faced with your hit rate?
I would say it's a good selection for a PM. Like if you are okay with being wrong, and you have that mindset that you want to learn and figure out this thing and go after it and really figure it out and create something that's valuable for the customer, not for you. And that's all. And for that to happen, it's okay if you are wrong in your assumption, then you have a higher chance to become a better PM, in my opinion. But again, hypothesis, we'll see. It might be, I think if you have a high ego, then you, in a way, you will be pushed aside because it's not that kind of job.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you, besides the low ego, that you think
yeah,
we should work on?
This is one of the things. Yeah, I know. read
Because
what's the
it's a lifelong project.
yeah. You can read ego is the enemy. It kind of humbles you down. And there are definitely you should understand some metrics because it's part of your job description. So you definitely should do that. You should have understanding of any kind of strategy, like business product strategy, because again, it's part of your job description. So you should somewhat be good at that. And kind of these two, I would say it separates a project manager from a product manager. You're not a, I don't know how to say it. You don't just push out tasks to your team anymore. You have to come up with those tasks that actually have an impact or might have the opportunity to have an impact, and it ties back to your strategy. So yeah, definitely you should have knowledge about what's a strategy, how to talk with your team, how to make the most of your resources that you have at hand because you're limited, and understand the metrics and how to like test different assumptions quite fast instead of like jumping in building stuff.
Okay, got that. Talking about like friction points, and you had like you worked with dozens and dozens of companies. Do you see any pattern about blind spots that that startups or companies have when they think about friction and analyzing the performance of their applications?
Like besides the thing that you also already mentioned in a way regarding the features that are not used, because that happens, I would say, quite a lot. People are in building mode a lot and not necessarily thinking about why they do what they do. It's like, oh, we should build this thing, and they start it. Not like that exactly, but you kind of get the idea. So there is this thing that some people emphasize too much on building instead of like actually figuring out what and why. The other part is that there are either founders that jump too fast to, or product managers even that jumps too fast to conclusions. So they see a couple of, I don't know, upset customers and they assume that, oh, so the customers are upset now. But it's just like you jump too fast to a conclusion that in a way it might be true, but it also might be false. So just jumping too fast to a conclusion. And it happens in other ways as well. It's like you have a problem or somebody gets you a problem and you jump to the first conclusion, like first solution for the problem that comes to your mind. And again, that's not necessarily the best thing to do. So definitely this. And assuming that if there are more people involved, that the other one gets the same idea as you. And I found that especially working with founders that have like the big picture stuff was kind of the same, but they were like slight differences. And either both assume that the other one thinks the same, either they assume that it's not that important. And it might not be important at that stage, but think about it, it's like a crack a lot of times. You put pressure on the crack starts to become bigger. And this whole small stuff like, oh, is our customer this or is our customer this? And is our product about this thing or about that thing? In the beginning, it might not be that important, but after a certain time, and I don't know, VC money comes to you and stuff like this, you have to make decisions that are not that easy anymore. And the fact that your customer is, I don't know, this kind of doctor or that kind of doctor, it starts to matter. It's not like the same. Yeah, they're both doctors, definitely. But one of them works with, I don't know, 20 patients per day. The other one works with 100. The other one uses the product on a laptop. The other one uses on a tablet. And this kind of stuff starts to actually matter a lot. So small differences should be in a way ironed out in the beginning or quite fast, I would say, at least discussed and mapped out. So kind of these like top of my mind, these couple of them that come to my mind.
Cool. There's a question I ask from all my guests as a last question, and it is about, we talked a lot, or hopefully you talked a lot more than I did. What are the three things we should remember from everything that you said today, like the three key messages that you have for the audience?
Definitely talk with your customers quite often. And it makes sense, as I mentioned, that there are spikes and after that you kind of go a bit slower, but definitely try to find a way to be in contact with your customers. And we mentioned a couple of ways to do this. Test before you build, like find different ways to test your hypothesis and assumptions before investing too much resources in actually coding that, especially if that coding part or development part takes months. Because if it's something that you can like put it out quite fast, then that might be the test in itself. But a lot of times development costs more money and takes more time. So you have to, best practice, test it out before getting to that stage. And try to act like a detective. So question stuff, form hypotheses, try to test them, try to prove them wrong if possible, and just try to get as much insights as possible from all of these inputs, and like based on that form your assumptions.
Cool. Thanks a lot. I think it was like a very, very concise and to the point summary. So with that, I'm going to open the floor for questions. I already have 3 that I noted down. If anybody else have questions, feel free to do so. Anna said, if you don't want to like join the floor now, it's also fine. You can send us your questions later on. So the first one is the following. What are your thoughts on involving the Q&A team at the start of the design process with devs, designers, and PMs? Usually QA, in some situations, they are involved only in the end.
How I work with startups, it's like a lot of times we involve a lot of team members from different areas. And that means sometimes not necessarily QA, but somebody from customer care or support or these areas. The whole thing, who you involve, this is how I think about who you involve and who you don't involve. You usually involve people that can have added value on the challenge that you work with. So if you have to see what's the challenge, and after that, who can add value on top of that, that's not already in the team. Now, depending on where you position the QA and what kind of added value can they bring, that's up to the decision of who facilitates this whole thing, who will get involved or not. Because you have to balance 2 things in a way. You have to balance the fact that you grab more people and you might have more insights, but that usually comes with the fact that that person doesn't work on what they should work in other places. Like the QA does the QA stuff at that point. So in a way, you have to account for the time. And the other one is that you get more noise in the system. So you have to balance these things, the noise, time, and the value they bring.
Good, got it. I think like the more people you have around the table, the more opinion on everything. So there's also this efficiency aspect that you need to manage on top of like what you get the insights from.
Exactly.
Brilliant. We had a question from Harry, and he asked is learning all the framework in UX design a necessity? And if not, what is the alternative? Or learning UX psychology is a good alternative?
I'm not a purist. This is what I usually say. So I don't know. I kind of work I mix the stuff that I need to get my job done, I would say. So even the frameworks that I use, sometimes they are mixed with other frameworks. And you have to see what frameworks you use for what. So the whole thing is like you have a challenge. You try to see what you need to get solutions for that specific challenge. If you have a hypothesis, then, okay, how we can test this hypothesis? That's the first thing, right? It's not like, oh, we have these UX frameworks, what we do with these UX frameworks, and then that's for another cause. So you have the hypothesis, you have to see how you can test the hypothesis. And for this, there are a bunch of books there, like a couple of them are here. Design Thinking Playbook, Design Thinking, whatever the other one is. And the guys from Strategizer have some books that they can guide you on like what methodologies to use for what kind of testing and how accurate they are. So you don't have to know all of them. There are the basic ones like user persona and customer journey map and maybe user story mapping and some mappings. Oh, and there's also a book about mapping, so you can have that as well. So it's really hard to know all of them. I would focus more on understanding, at least this was my path in a way. I learned UX and the basics of UX, and I've done UX design for quite some time. And after that, I started to move a bit more towards a PM role, but I wasn't a PM, I was a product designer. And I started to learn more about like startups and strategy and product strategy and like business strategy and this kind of stuff. And I started to find a way to put this whole thing together. In a way, it's like a mess. Because that's what what was my passion. So I read Inspired and Running Lean and I don't know, a bunch of other books. So it's not about knowing all the frameworks. It's more about defining the challenge, and after that, going nuts about how we can solve the challenge. I would say. At least that's my approach. The best way.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. I wanted to say you mentioned a couple of good resources and books. So when I send out the recording in the next few days, I'm going to include a link to these resources so everybody can go back to them. We had a question from Vinny. How do you map and merge the qualitative data you gather from user interviews to the quantitative data to understand the friction? And he brings an example. Typically, when we interview users, we get like a lot of inputs and themes. It is only after building and releasing at least a prototype of that feature that we can truly validate the hypothesis. Is there a way to make sure that as a PM, we reduce this cycle to building the right features for the right friction points? So maybe the first part of the question was like matching the qualitative and quantitative data to the right friction points.
Yeah, like on a customer journey map, you kind of map the insights. You don't match like this is this kind of data, this is that kind of data. So it's much more mapping the insights on the map. Like this is where friction happens. It's not like the amount of them. Like the amount, it might be on the scale, I would say, but kind of that's it. So again, I'm not a purist, so take me for that. I would just map the insights on the specific area of the customer journey. So if you map the whole journey out, you can, if you want to go like really in detail, you can say, okay, this is the amount of data that we have here. And these number of users have said that this sucks. And this is the feedback that we got for there. So you can put basically the whole thing on the journey map. And after that, form some insights after that. And you can use a bunch of AI tools nowadays to extract themes and inputs to have like a summarized thing of this whole thing in one place. So yeah, I don't know how good of an answer is, but this is how I do it.
Yeah, I think this user journey map is a good or a helpful mental model.
Any kind of mapping tool, it's good, but a lot of people are not using them that much because they think that it's very simplistic. And the other one is like, it's time consuming to make. And both are true. In a way, it's simplistic, but it's a good overview. So you don't have everything there, but it's a good overview and starting point. And after that, once you have the whole product mapped out in a way on a journey map or the area at least that you want to target, it's easier to understand where the friction happens because you put all this data on the map. Either it's quantitative, either it's qualitative. You put it on the map so you know that, okay, this is the area that has more problem. And you make the decisions because you have everything in one place. It's a summary, if you want.
Yeah. This question also reminded me of the previous webinar I had. My guest was talking about Mixed Methods research, where you come up with the topic, something that you want to research, and then you pick like, okay, do I need to run a survey first and then do interviews? But then you have this overarching research goal that helps you guide which parts of various qualitative and quantitative data you want to put on the table for that specific topic.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the hypothesis first, and after that, you try to figure out how to test the hypothesis.
Yes. Okay, I have a last question from.
I don't know if we answered the second part of the question. I don't think so.
Sorry, I jumped the gun. So yes, I let you absorb and get back on the second part.
Okay. So it is only after building and releasing at least a prototype. It really depends on how much time you need to launch a prototype, because sometimes it's just one day to create a prototype, a couple of hours maybe. I tested a bunch of these prototypes, just like a Figma screens linked together, and it took us like, I don't know, 4 hours, 8 hours, basically one day sometimes to create the prototype, get it in front of the customers. So there is quite a lot of time saving on that part, I would say.
But I think it's a very important point, which is underlying, at least in this question for me, is that you ultimately want to see how customers behave, what they do with the feature, because there's a big difference between what they say they will do and what they actually do with it. And I like this point about building a quick prototype, a couple of hours, if that's a possibility, and then get user feedback on that.
You can fake almost everything nowadays.
Precisely. We have 2 minutes left. We have a last question from Kylie. If any of you have further questions, feel free to throw it in. I'll make Daniel somehow to get back on these questions and circulate back to you. But this last question from Kylie is that, do you have any advice for product designers who are working with PMs who do have big egos and are inexperienced at the same time? That's a good combination. Or don't understand product proper function. This can be a blocker to product design, and it would be good to understand if there's a good way to navigate this in this environment. Find a better PM.
If it really depends on how the team is structured, but if it's like a real blocker, that means like what you say, it's a no for that, then you don't really have any power. And honestly, if I don't know, any books that you read on PMs, it's not a one single hero kind of job. And a product designer, it doesn't work like that as well. So it's not like for a successful company, successful product, if you want, each stakeholder in a way owns part of that, but they work together to like the whole system to work out. Otherwise, it's like the PM can do the designers and developers job. The designer can do the PMs and the developers job and the marketing job and like this whole thing. So think about it. It's like a puzzle. If one of them fails, and especially if the PM fails, which is responsible to a bunch of stuff, whatever, it's like the rest of it doesn't really matter that much anymore, because they are responsible usually, if it's like a real PM, responsible to somewhat strategy and metrics and business. So if that doesn't work, then whatever, you can create, I don't know, code as good as you want, create as good designs as you want. But there is a big friction in the team, and it might be kind of useless, as bad as it sounds. But
yeah. I have a side note to this. Something I like to do with our developers, I invite them to user interviews every now and then. And before they join, I ask them to write 3 assumptions that they have. There's always like a specific goal of the discussion, and I ask them to write down these assumptions, because I think it's a very humbling experience to see what you think the customer will do with this prototype, and then realizing that not necessarily that you were wrong, but there's more depth and a wider spectrum of potential user behavior. So you can't change personalities, and if someone has a big ego, that's a difficult one. But I think like some of these experiences of coming in with your assumption and then seeing how the discussion unfolds with the customer, that's also helpful to prove your point to them.
Yeah, I would just add, if they are coachable, like if they want to learn, that's really important. So if they are unexperienced but they want to learn, then there are ways to do that and to work around. If they have big ego, then they usually don't want to learn, and then there is not a lot to do after it. One of the things that we might go a bit over time, hope it's okay. One of the things when I started to hire designers in one of the teams, it was the first thing on the list when they joined the team. It was exactly this: no egos, and you have to be coachable, because the other ones, it doesn't matter. The other skills are not that important anymore. If you fail at the first 2, that's it.
We have one last question that came. It's from Vinny. About have you seen any considerable differences in understanding users' friction between B2B and B2C type of customers? In B2B, the buyer and the consumer of products are not the same. Right? They are different people. How do you apply the same qualitative and quantitative methods there?
You have to understand their roles, basically. Who buys the product, who uses the product, because each of them are looking for something, and you have to deliver on that. So if the person that buy the product, it's different than the one that actually uses the product, kind of that's it. So you have to figure out that who buys the product usually is not necessarily your part. It's like that usually the PM's role to, if he's a PM, he might be a PM, sorry. So if you are a PM, then it's your thing to do it. So you have to understand what the person who's buying the product is looking for. And you can do that through interviews we've done with jobs to be done and stuff like that. Like interviews, what they are looking, what they compare, what kind of other competitors they compare you to, and why they chose either you, either the competitor. Kind of this is what you want to learn. And if with the person that actually uses the product, then you can talk about how they use the product and what's working, what's not working. For that, it's a bit easier to create the customer journey map, I would say, because you have the whole flow of they are using the product. And for the one that buys the product, you have to understand where they fit into this. Do they just pay for the product, or they set up the account and they invite the other persons, and then they are in a way accountable holders of an account, So if that's the case, then they have, again, a customer journey map for that.
Yes. So it adds actually an additional layer of complexity.
Yes.
Because you need to like explore the needs of like multiple types of users and make them both happy, because you need both.
The difference is if both of them are using the product or not. If one of them is just a pay, like who pays or buys and pays, because sometimes that happens, it's like think about, I don't know, Figma, let's say. The designer starts to use the product, they invite other colleagues to the product, but somebody from the company will end up paying for the product. So the buyer is the company. They have to, in a way, convince the person who holds the money, if you want, to pay for this. But on the whole system, kind of the designer uses setups and creates the whole thing.
Daniel, it was a pleasure to have you here. Thanks so much for your wisdom and your stories. We had a fantastic audience today. Awesome questions. I couldn't have come up with better questions. So I'm really grateful you all came and threw these questions at Daniel. Daniel, I hope to see you around and stay in touch.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. Thanks. It was nice being here.
Brilliant. Take care. Good evening.
Bye-bye.